fourth quarter GDP numbers have been announced. Actually, the Indian economy for FY20 grew at its slowest pace in 10 years. The last financial year GDP grew by just 4.2%. The growth rate was the lowest since 2008 financial crisis. The key drags have been manufacturing, which was flat, didn't grow at all from FY19 levels. Construction, usually a very big contributor, has come in at a mere 1.3%. Trade, hotels and transport, which is a large sector that employs a lot of informal sector people, grew at just 3.6%. Financial sector grew by only 4.6%. Last year, that is FY19, which was not a very good year for financial sector, it still grew by 6.8%. Only public administration, which is government expenditure on health, education, etc., public administration grew by 10% and agriculture grew by 4%. These two have helped bolster the GDP for FY20 to 4.2%. However, the sanctity of these numbers is not very high. First, because government itself admits it didn't get much of the data for the fourth quarter because of extended timelines for filing. But more importantly, the sanctity is low because the Central Statistical Organization has dramatically revised lower the GDP for the first three quarters. For the first quarter, GDP is down to 5.2% from 5.6% earlier. For Q2, GDP is down to 4.4 from 5.1 earlier, a 70 basis point cut in Q2 GDP, while Q3 GDP is also down in equal measure. It is down to 4.1% from 4.7% earlier. GDP numbers are usually revised after 1 year after the year ends, when the full data is available with the MCA with respect to unlisted companies and the small scale sector. Revising data midstream is quite unprecedented and could be seen as casting aspersions on the credibility of GDP data. Separately, the government has also released the FY20 tax and expenditure numbers, and they indicate that the fiscal deficit for FY20 is 4.59% and not 3.8%, as was mentioned in the budget on February 1st. So what does all this say about the state of the economy and the ability of the government to respond to the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis? Joining me to discuss that are Soumyakanti Ghosh, the Chief Economic Advisor at State Bank of India, Dr. Pranab Sen, former Chairman of the Statistics Commission and a former Chief Statistician of the country, and Dr. Sudipto Mundal, member of the 14th Finance Commission, as well a person who has held many positions in the NIPFP and the NCAR, an acclaimed economist. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Soumya, I will come to you first because I guess you've gone through both the fiscal deficit numbers, the tax collection numbers and the GDP numbers. Well, 4.2. Are you surprised, first of all, by the revision of the previous three numbers? How much can you rely that it is indeed 4.2% GDP growth for FY20?
Yeah, thank you, Lata. I think there is another data which has also come in silently is the bank credit data, so which also shows a significant contraction in the month of April. So that is one more data. Okay. Now, coming to a specific point, I think the headline number is 4.2%. Now, when you look into the numbers in details, that 4.2% without any revisions in Q1, Q2, Q3, that number would have is mapped to 1.2% in Q4. Oh. So therefore, that 1.2% has become 3.1% because the total revision in the data which I can find out in terms of the lakh crores is 1.17 lakh crores for the full year, of which 60,000 crores have been appropriated to Q4 and the rest I think it has been done in equal proportion in Q1, Q2, Q3. Q2 and Q3 in the same proportion, Q1 is a little lower proportion.
Okay.
And out of this loss, 1.2 lakh crores, the total loss in the service sector is 1.05 lakh crores. So that actually tells that the impact of the lockdown which started has actually severely dented the service sector and if you look through the numbers as we go on in the show, you will see that some of the sectors like the tourism, and in fact, even on the manufacturing side, the construction sector activity has been badly hit.
Yes.
So in my sense, the numbers that you should actually look into the headline number rather than the Q1, Q2, Q3 numbers, because if I remember it correctly, these numbers were revised in February only.
Yes.
And again, it has been revised in May. I don't remember that these numbers had such a low shelf life as I can see right now.
No, I can see as a person who handles data, you're deeply upset at this constant revision of GDP numbers. So before I come to the exact extent of the GDP slowdown, I just want to drive home the point that Soumya is making. Soumya is saying that if you kept the Q1, Q2 and Q3 GDP numbers as they were when they were first announced, and then look at the full year 4.2 GDP, then actually the Q4 GDP would be something like 1.2%. But it has come at 3% because the previous numbers have been revised lower. So the loss of Q4 appears to have been divided over the 4 quarters. Not a very good thing to do if this is indeed what the CSO has done. One would like the quarterly numbers to be presented as they are. We should be joined by Dr. Sen and Sunita Mundal shortly. Soumya, let me just come to you on the fiscal deficit number as well. That has come in at 4.6% almost. And the tax shortfall is 1.5 lakh crore compared to what the revised estimates gave us in the budget. Given this, do you think the government has the firepower to pull up the economy in the current year when deficit is already high even last year?
No, I think, Lata, that's a very valid point. I think 1.7 lakh crores is the total loss in revenue if we just look into the last 10 or 15 days. So, and that makes the fiscal deficit at 4.6%. And given this significant loss in the exchequer, I think it will be very difficult because the problem is that we have a tax collection where the states also pay. So any shortfall in the state tax collection will have a cascading impact on the states also. So basically this 1.7 lakh crores means that the state's revenue would have also suffered in equal proportion. So my sense is that again here you need to also look into the consolidated deficit for the next fiscal year, because that number could be likely in double digits given the extent of the revenue shortfall which we are envisaging in the FY21.
Okay. Now we have Dr. Sen and Dr. Mundal also with us. Dr. Sen, first up, I want to raise this issue of credibility of data. Usually GDP numbers for Q1, Q2, Q3 are revised 1 year later in the next year, February. But now in May itself, we are seeing the Q1, Q2, Q3 numbers revised. Does that cast aspersions? Does that cast doubt on the quality of data?
No, Lata, I think you've got it wrong. It has been the practice always to revise all the quarterly numbers when you come up with the provisional estimate for the year and the Q4 estimates. So this has always been done, and that's the right way to do it. The problem, in fact, was earlier, where before the Q4 numbers came out, previous quarterly numbers were revised. That was unprecedented, but what has been done this time around is perfectly legitimate, and that's how it should be.
No, this time we did get revisions in February also, Dr. Sen, and when we got the Q3 numbers, and we have got a further revision. Is it always revised twice in the year?
So, no. In fact, when you got the Q3 numbers, the previous numbers should not have been revised.
Okay.
So usually the methodology is that you come out with the quarterly numbers, and then when you come up with the Q4 number and the provisional estimate simultaneously, then just to get consistency across all the numbers, you revise the previous 3 quarters as well.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that said, Dr. Sen, what is your estimate of GDP last year? At 4.2%, it is the lowest since the Lehman year. And this is only with 2 weeks of last year being impacted by the coronavirus problem. Does it look like it is weaker than you thought?
I suspect it's going to be weaker still once the full data comes in. Because Lata, I think we are under a misconception that this is only 1 week of national lockdown and a little bit prior to that. Actually, if you look at what the state governments were doing, many of them had locked down well before. In the first week of March, a few states had locked down. More importantly, see, we keep ascribing everything to the lockdown. But the fact of the matter is that the trade and tourism industry was impacted right through March. And so that is a fairly large, so if you look at all the activities that are related to tourism, which is transport, hotels, restaurants, and so on, that's a fairly large chunk of GDP. So I think you're actually underestimating the period.
No, I take your point that because East Asia, China, Europe were all affected through March. Throughout March, we did have a problem of imports and exports, and that is reflected in the trade data for the entire month of March. But lockdown in our state, Maharashtra, which was quite severely affected, started by March 18th. Lockdowns did not start before March 15th in most states, sir. But I agree with you that tourism and trade was severely affected throughout March. Let me come to invite Dr. Mundal as well. Dr. Mundal, you know, the previous, if you looked at Q3, that has been revised from 4.7 to 4.1. If you looked at Q3 as 4.1 and Q4 as 3, it looks like we have slowed much earlier. We have gone into COVID pretty weak as an economy.
Yeah, as you know, in fact, it's probably the 9th or 10th quarter straight where so this decline didn't start with the coronavirus crisis. It's been now.
No, Dr. Mundal, we may have to redial. We are not getting you very clearly. We'll get back to you in just a minute. Just redial your number in a second. Let me come to you, Dr. Sen, on the fiscal deficit numbers. Even those have been released for last year. The tax revenue shortfall is by 1.5 lakh crore for the centre, and therefore the deficit has gone up by almost an equal number, by about 1.5 lakh crore. So the actual deficit is 4.6% for FY20. Does this set us up a little badly to be able to have a larger fiscal deficit in the current year?
Well, the current year, the fiscal deficit is going to look horrendous. But, you know, as far as the tax collection part of it is concerned, you know, you're really comparing it, I think, to the RE estimates.
Yes.
If you are, then you have a problem because those numbers were not very accurate to begin with. And quite deliberately so.
Okay.
So what you are getting now is a semblance of the truth.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, they were perhaps overstated deliberately, as you say, and therefore a 1.5 lakh crore shortfall in taxes, but a 4.6% fiscal deficit even before the full impact of coronavirus, which perhaps is 2 or 3 weeks of FY20, doesn't set us up very nicely. We have Dr. Mundal with us. First, Dr. Mundal, if you can give us your view on growth itself, because if you look at the 4 quarters of FY20, it's 5.2, the numbers will come up for you, 5.2, 4.7, 4.1. We're already weakening rather seriously, and then 3% in the 4th quarter. I mean, we are much weaker than we thought, you think?
Well, actually, I was saying earlier when we got disconnected that this is like the 9th or 10th quarter in a row where the growth rate has been steadily coming down. So what the coronavirus thing has done is to hit us with a huge shock when already we were, going down very sharply for the previous nearly 3 years. So I think that's what has happened. And I would repeat that phrase which I told you earlier.
Yes.
When you see what's happening in Q1, Q2 and so on of this financial year,
Yes.
things will be much worse.
Yes.
Actually, we have our assessment is that in Q1 of 2021, output is down by 25%
Okay.
compared to the same quarter last year.
Okay, so we have to set ourselves up for a contraction for the full year of what, 5%? What is your estimate for the current year?
Well, it's contingent on what the government does. In a counterfactual where the government takes no policy intervention, we came out with a minus 12 to 13%. But that's just a counterfactual. Inside, the government is providing stimulus, both fiscal and monetary, and so on. So our assessment now is that probably if it continues, with the fiscal measures it's taken and the monetary, RBI stimulus and so on, we'll probably be down by, around 5% or 2% or thereabouts. But certainly we'll remain in negative territory unless there's some huge big stimulus coming, which I don't see happening.
Okay. Yes, I think the going number on the street is at the moment minus 5%. Many brokerages are at 5%, including Soumya Ghosh, who is with us. I think he's... Soumya, would you want to revise your FY21 numbers now? I mean, given what the government has announced by way of help.
No, I think as of now, we are actually on the lower side. We are at minus 6.8%. So, because we have seen a significant contraction in Q1, which is even larger than the street estimates, but we have also expected the pent-up demand could get a good growth number in the Q2. So the point that the government needs to do is to sustain that number in Q2, Q3, and Q4. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to offset the huge contraction in Q1. So we are now currently going with that assumption. So we'll see as the numbers come in, because today we got the core output data. We'll get the IIP numbers in June.
Yes.
And also, and that will give a fair idea about the amount of contraction and the activity. Because you need to remember one thing, Lata, is that initially activities had started better in May, but now because of the spread of the virus, these activities may again start contracting. So we could be back to again the square one, which were in April earlier. So that's the point which we need to know, that could be an adverse shock, which was not expected earlier. Possibly that could come in June, because all indications now, there could be some amount of restriction in activity even in June. So if that is the case, that could actually act as a constraint on growth.
Oh, yes, of course it would. Well, there are a couple of more things I wanted to discuss with our group. The private final consumption expenditure for last year, FY20, has already fallen to 5%, and gross fixed capital formation is minus 2.8. This is after we had 11 normal months and only 1 month perhaps of impacted activity. The nominal GDP growth has come in at 7.2% for FY20. This perhaps is the lowest in several decades. Because we always got bailed out by a slightly higher inflation, and we have had double-digit nominal GDP growth for as long as I can remember. So if you have a nominal GDP of 7.2, then where does that leave the nominal GDP for the current year? Plus, with tax revenues falling, what is the space available for the government to go ahead and give any kind of help to the economy? Those questions to my guests in a minute after this break. Welcome back. The GDP for FY20 has come in at 4.2%, and the fiscal deficit for the same year has come in at 4.6%. These are the revised numbers, which can make the government's elbow room for tackling the current year slowdown a little restricted. Or does it? All those questions to my guests. I have been speaking with Soumya Ghosh, Dr. Sudipto Mandal, and Dr. Pranab Sen. Well, Dr. Pranab Sen, we are in an evolving situation. The latest coronavirus numbers are still on an increase. I mean, we have increased by over 7,000 cases just yesterday, just over the last 24 hours. So it looks like the lockdown will be extended. Under the circumstances, what would your advice be to the government? What can they do, first in terms of lockdown and second in terms of fiscal help?
This is a difficult question.
Yes.
Because the fact of the matter is that up to now, the bulk of the livelihood damage has been borne essentially by the unorganized labor, whether in the informal sector or informally employed in the formal sector. That's where most of the livelihood damage has occurred. But if the lockdown continues further, then what is going to happen is that people with regular jobs, relatively high-paying jobs who so far have been insulated, are going to start losing their jobs as well. And then things get messier and messier. So now we are looking at a situation where I think we can no longer take for granted that the life and livelihood issues are really about the poor. It's about the middle class as well. And that's a call that the government is going to have to take, because that's the core voter base that the government would have to look at.
Yes, fair point, sir. And I can tell you it's reaching more and more sectors. If not job cuts, salary cuts definitely has reached perhaps 90% of private sector salaried employees. And we already know that the government has pulled back on DA, dearness allowance increases. So clearly a larger part of the salary class is hurt. Dr. Mundal, same question to you. Already you're starting with a 4.6% fiscal deficit. The revenues for this year are going to be decimated in the first half simply because we are not allowing the economy to move. So, what can the government do at this juncture?
Lata, at this point of time, the last thing I would worry about is the deficit. Because if there is a larger deficit, it is actually it in a sense offset what you were just talking about, the decline in private demand. Because the larger deficit means a larger impulse. My worry is where all this will fall, because if the government was really giving money and free ration support to just poor people, that demand would mainly fall on food. Food grains and so on. And even though food prices are the ones that have been rising in the past, I think in the year that is now coming in, because we've had a good rabi harvest, we have large food stocks and so on, I expect some supply side response there, and food price inflation is good. But if the demand falls on other sectors where we've had a huge supply shock and the supply response will be much slower, then I'm afraid we're going to look at a situation of not only negative growth, but combined with rising inflation. So the details of whether it's a larger fiscal deficit or,
become
or
economic.
whatever.
Yeah. Dr. Mundal, therefore, perhaps the most important thing is now to start an intelligent reduction of the lockdown, to take the risk, because otherwise poverty and hunger will consume as many lives as perhaps corona is.
Yes, I agree. That's probably already happening. I mean, everybody monitoring the deaths due to the virus. Nobody monitoring deaths due to other factors related to economic hardships, and it's probably much larger than the 4,000 plus of people who have already died because of coronavirus. I absolutely agree with you. My worry is that I don't think we have a government which is sophisticated enough in terms of capacity to do this fine-tuning kind of, intelligent reduction of the lockdown, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
We do very broad-brushed, bang-bang type of thing, as that we got used to it, demonetization, then the GST rollout, and now this.
And in this case, they're also hamstrung by the fact that the actual administration lies with the states, and state chief ministers also are a bit wary of reducing the lockdown, lest they have a large health problem on their hands. Soumya, we are running out of time, but are there any monetary solutions at all at this point in time, or do we have to look only to the government at this juncture? Monetary policy is just over.
No, I think, Lata, there is still some space for monetary, but now the debates actually has turned from lives versus livelihood to lives versus lives, because the point is that the more you extend the lockdown and the more you actually get entrapped with the lockdown, and that is actually going to hurt the economy even in an adverse manner, even more adversely. So we now need to make an exit from that, because we also need to remember that Indians are immune to this type of diseases, and we have to live with this coronavirus maybe for some point of time, because otherwise if we don't make an exit right now, I'll just give an example. The total, we'll land up in a situation in this fiscal year when the entire capital expenditure of the states and of the center could be completely wiped out. So that could actually halt the growth to the
Yes.
barest minimum which we are projecting.
Okay.
And that's the worry which I have, because if the government can't spend, growth is going to be a casualty.
No, I take your point. That is going to be very serious. Dr. Sen, just that final word. Do you think we have permanently damaged India's potential growth, and now it's going to take us a while to get back to the 6% mark?
Well, nothing is permanent, Lata, but
What I mean is for the next 2-3 years.
Let me put it to you very bluntly, which is that my calculations, my model essentially shows that unless the government steps up its fiscal stimulus significantly, and by significantly I mean at least to an additionality of 10 lakh crores, we are looking not just at negative growth this year, we're looking at negative growth next year as well. You know, we keep forgetting that something called a multiplier works. We've had experience of multiplier
Yes.
working in the country,
Okay.
and that is going to play out, if anything, more in a more pronounced manner next year, when you're least expecting it.
Yes.
And that is something the government has to be aware of, and it needs to take steps now. The more you delay it, the worse the problem becomes, because the kind of issues that Shoma was talking about in terms of capital formation, and even the capital formation by governments, is just going to continue to
decline.
slide.
Yes.
And that makes your potential growth come down dramatically. You know, remember, in the analysis that I've been doing, I've taken potential growth at 6%. And even then I'm getting a negative growth next year, negative over a negative base.
Yes.
That is a very serious comment.
You put it very well, Dr. Sen. I won't even try to paraphrase it. We are staring at a very, very bleak future unless we take very concrete steps, as Dr. Mundal said, to intelligently come out of the lockdown quickly. And as Dr. Sen and Soumya are saying, that the government steps up fiscal support to the economy dramatically. Otherwise, we are looking at a contraction over a contraction, 2 years of contracting economy, very, very severe for us. We wrap up on this special show on the state of the economy. Thank you very much for watching.